千里之行，始于足下。A journey of 1,000 miles begins beneath the feet. We now gather in the Tao to travel the journey together. Welcome to Tao Talks with Derek Lin, where we take a deep dive into the Daodejing by Laozi. As always, I would like to extend a warm welcome to one and all. Thank you for joining us. I would like to invite you to center your thoughts and direct your attention to this moment in time, to the here and now, to be fully present and mindfully aware as we all ready ourselves for this sacred process in the Tao with one another. As you may recall from last time, the title of the chapter is Soft and Pliant. So the focus of this chapter is on the principle of softness. And I often think about this as a different perspective from what we usually see, especially in the Western world. In our world, the emphasis oftentimes seems to be on the appearance of being powerful and strong. Whether it's in sports, politics, or entertainment, the world in which we live seems to be saturated with this emphasis. The emphasis of the Tao is quite the opposite. There may be the appearance of softness, like water being a prime example, but beneath that surface appearance, there is tremendous strength. So the Tao is not so much about the display of power and strength, but about the appearance that may seem ordinary to most people, but in fact, just beneath the surface is true strength, real strength, the strength within. In the Tao, that would be spiritual strength. And that strength represents the growth of the Tao cultivator. So let's take a look at the chapter. It's a relatively short chapter with 13 lines, and we did the initial sectional analysis, and we were able to divide it up into 3 sections. And so what I'm showing now is the results of that analysis, where we have identified repeating lines in a poetic structure. So in the first section, you're going to see A, B, A, B. And you can see the corresponding repeating characters and the translation that those characters map to the right-hand side. Then in section 2, you see the CD or just ABAB structure in poetic construction, and you can see the repeating characters there. And then the last section doesn't have as much repetition in terms of that poetic structure. It's the concluding section. And so we have our 3 sections, where the first section talks about human beings being soft and alive, being hard and rigid upon death. And then it goes on to talk about living things, and it describes them in similar fashion. That is, while alive, all living things exhibit the softness and suppleness, but when dead, they become dry and brittle. So that's the first section that we went over last time. The middle section, section 2, talks about the distinction between the follower of death and then the follower of life. So we'll be spending some time on that, and we'll be discussing the significance of these terms. Exactly what do they mean in this context? and also what they mean compared to the other chapters of the Daodejing. And then finally, in the concluding section, section 3, we'll be able to get to that today as well. It is using army on the battlefield as a metaphor, and also a tree as a metaphor for life. So the last 2 lines are very indicative of the position that Lao Tzu takes in this whole philosophical point about the soft versus the hard. So in the last 2 concluding lines, Lao Tzu will talk about how the big and forceful are actually in a lower position, while the soft and pliant is in a higher position. So we'll talk about that as well. Now, as a recap of what we have already discussed, we went from line 1 to line 5. Starting with line 1, this is the beginning point where Lao Tzu talks about human beings that, while alive, being soft and pliant. That's how both you and I are. There's a softness to the physical bodies that we inhabit. That softness goes away when we die, and so we become stiff. And this appears, when this is explained by Tao masters, they will talk about the softness and hardness of human beings, but then they will also go into different aspects of that human being beyond the physical body. So it's not just the body, but also the mind, and also spiritual aspects, and more so, and even more so than just the aspects of a human being. Tao masters will also talk about the way that human beings interact with the world. And what that means is the relationships that we form with other people, the relationship that we have to things, objects in the material world. All of these are applicable to this whole idea of the soft and pliant versus the hard and rigid. So last time I was able to summarize the concepts in a table that we went over. It looks like this, but we have one row for the principle of softness, and then we have the bottom row there for the hard, stiff, tough aspects, which is the complementary opposite of that. And in the columns, you see how the 2 principles are applied to spirituality, relationships, social interactions, and material things. So the soft approach when it comes to spirituality denotes an openness to new concepts, new ideas. It's talking about an awareness about the world, ourselves, our spirituality, whatever it is that we perceive in the world, as well as what we cannot perceive. And also sharing of spiritual insights. So when you have the soft approach, you are open to new ideas in spirituality, you become aware of life itself, and whatever insights you gain, you're able to share that with other people. So compare that with the hard approach. The hard approach is not open necessarily to new ideas, instead holding on to old ideas in dogma, so dogmatic beliefs. So rather than awareness of life itself, spirituality, there's a certain fanatical zeal. And I think that as we go through life, we have all noted people that we perhaps are acquainted with who have that fanatical zeal. And then they will tend to proselytize. That is to say, they want to present and even force sometimes their ideas onto others, and they will insist that you hear them out. And even more extreme cases, they will insist upon you adopting the same beliefs. that is a very different paradigm than the sharing of insights, of concepts, of ideas, which is hopefully what we're doing now. Rather than to force anyone to see things in a certain way, we just want to bring things up for discussion, and then everybody can be making up their own minds about what they want to adopt for themselves. So the same scheme continues with relationships. When you have the soft approach, it's about caring, kindness, showering attention upon your loved ones, upon people who are close to you, to be supportive of them, to be helpful to them. Whereas the hard approach, you verge into codependency. You get into manipulative tricks that people play upon one another in such a codependent relationship. People think about themselves more so than the partner, than the other people. They just want to get what they want out of that relationship rather than to care for what the other person wants. And in a similar fashion, if you extend that out to social interactions, this is not loved ones, family members. This is more like the people that you come across every day, perhaps coworkers, perhaps people that you encounter just on an everyday existence. So the soft approach would make someone considerate, courteous, and kind in dealing with all the people that they come across. Whereas the hard approach, that is the approach of arrogance. That is when someone, rather than being kind, is harsh, critical, rather than being considerate, is very thoughtless. So that would be the hard approach. Again, caring about the self more so than anyone else. And then lastly, the soft approach to material things is about generosity, is about affluence. When you follow the Tao correctly, there's going to be abundance in your life. And the sharing is a manifestation of generosity when you want to share that goodness in life with everyone around you. Now, when you turn that around to the hard approach, there's not so much sharing, there's hoarding, there's flaunting, like, look at what I have. There also tends to be a lot of fear. What if I lose my things? What if they're stolen? What if they're damaged? There's a lot of fear associated with that. So right off the bat, we can see a huge difference between the soft approach and the hard approach in life for human beings. And Tao masters will even go a little further and talk about the different aspects of the mind and how the hard and soft approach can influence that. So when it comes to thoughts, what I've done is that I've positioned the soft approach on top. So the soft approach in your thinking just means that you are receptive, you're flexible in your thoughts, you are adaptable, you can adjust your thoughts to new ideas. Whereas the hard approach, you're fixated, you are closed-minded, you've got dogma, so you've got ideas that are locked in your brain, and they cannot be changed, no matter what. So in terms of the concepts that we entertain in our thoughts, in our mind, the soft approach means being receptive to new ideas, different perspectives. That's what other people present. So the difference between thoughts and concepts is that the thoughts is what happens in the mind. You know what the thoughts are. The concepts is a little bit different. It's what you believe, what you learn, what you understand. So it's like a subset of thoughts. The hard approach to concepts would mean resistant to change, and as I mentioned, being very dogmatic. So there's also the emotional aspects of it. What we have talked about in thoughts and concepts, these have more to do with the rational, logical parts of the mind. There's also feelings, and the soft approach applied to that means someone is fun to be with, fun to hang around with, relaxed, playful, approaching life in a very positive and pleasant way, whereas the hard approach is much more cynical, much more agitated, headstrong, harsher rhetoric being expressed with very strong emotions, and that's usually anger or rage. So again, a huge difference between the different kinds of principles applied to one's mind. Then last time, we also talked about softness and hard and rigid apply to all things, all living things, grass and trees. It's the same idea. While alive, these living things are soft and supple, but when dead, all of the moisture, the water, dry out, so it's very brittle, it's easy to break. And the last point that we talked about last time is that we want to keep the softness and hard, the soft and the hard in mind and moderate among them so that you can be soft, that is, be pliant and flexible in your approach. When you encounter obstacles, there's a different path. But you can be steadfast, you can be strong in keeping your goal consistent throughout the entire process. So you want to be yielding in life appropriately. When someone wants to go first, it's okay to let them. So you can yield, but you don't want to go overboard and compromise your values, and that's where you need some of that strength and being steadfast. So this particular path of cultivation can oftentimes, especially in the Western world, be perceived as a sort of weakness. But in reality, it is true strength. The image that I present in this particular slide is the point that I hope to make in that regard. It's the image of plant breaking through concrete to the surface. So the plant is soft and supple. It doesn't seem particularly strong or tough. And yet it grows out of very tough, hard concrete breaking through. And that is a symbol for the hidden strength, for the strength just beneath the surface of this soft approach, the strength of life itself. So that is the recap for what we talked about previously. Now let's go into new territory, starting with a summary in pictorial format of what we have talked about, the soft versus the hard. So what we have learned is that the soft is aligned with life. Newborn, plants, new growth, all are soft, whereas the hard is aligned with death. And for human beings, we can see that while alive, there's flexibility in body and also, hopefully, the mind. But upon death, stiff and inflexible with rigor mortis. So that's what we mean, what we say when we talk about a stiff cadaver. So that's the sort of a very graphic image presented by Lao Tzu to make his point. The difference between living and dead. And it's the same with things. When things grow, they're soft and supple, they're living, they're growing. When life is gone, so is the water. So they are dry and brittle, they're easy to break. So the soft aspect of it is much more to do with the Tao of Wu Wei. So how does that work? So Wu Wei sometimes has been described as the uncarved block. Well, the idea is really an uncarved piece of wood symbolizing the state at the very beginning of unlimited potential, like a newborn infant. there is no telling what this child will grow up to be. In the very beginning, there's infinite possibilities. As the child grows, more of those possibilities fall away until the child, upon reaching the teenage years and then adulthood, is picking and choosing the shape of life he or she will lead, discarding some possibilities. So Wu Wei, the initial state, is a very powerful state, and it is aligned with life. Now, the hard aspect of it, the hard aspect of life, the principle of the hard is the desiring state rather than the Tao of Wu Wei. That is, the hard side of life, the hard approach is oftentimes about things, acquisition, getting what it is that you desire. So that tends to spin out of control. And therefore, we say that the soft is the way to live, while the hard is the wrong path. So that's what a pictorial graphical summary looks like. Let's continue on into the chapter itself with line 6. Line 6 says, thus, that which is hard and stiff. So let's get into this particular line, starting with this idea of the hard and stiff. So in Mandarin, 坚强. In modern times, when you talk about someone or something being 坚强, you're talking about someone that is strong, that is tough, that can withstand a lot of hardship, that is a good thing. Here, though, it is what Lao Tzu says are the attributes aligned with death. Therefore, 坚强, although in modern times, everyday speech is used in a positive way, here, when we talk about 坚强in this chapter, it's spoken of in a negative way. Specifically, it's a statement that can apply to people with certain attributes or characteristics. For instance, someone is 坚强者, if they insist on doing things in a particular way. They are stubborn. They are set in their way, and they refuse to change their thinking or even look at a different possibility. And they are also the kind of people who are fearful of and resist change due to fear of the unknown. Fear is oftentimes associated with the hard in life, with a hard approach. So these are the people who can only see their own perspective, the quote-unquote my way or the highway. They are the ones who can only see a particular way of doing things. They will say things like, well, that's how it's always done. They're not interested in the reason why it's done that way. They just want to do it that way. There's no consideration to other people's input, no consideration of changing conditions, no idea about alternatives or perhaps better solutions. So then, lastly, these are also the people who refuse to admit mistakes. These are the people who double down. And the reason is because, again, of fear. The fear specifically is that I may be perceived as being weak if I admit to having been wrong. So that is the reason why they double down on that. So this is, as you can see, not a great way to live, not a person that people will be interested in getting to know. And specifically, Lao Tzu would say that such people are followers of death. So let's talk about this particular phrase. First, I want to analyze the 3 characters in this phrase, translated to the follower of death. literally, the first character is the character for death. The second character, the character in the middle, is the apostrophe S. And then the last character there is follower or disciple. So here, a follower of death denotes a rigid, inflexible person, a stubborn person. I want to be clear that this is not someone who worships death. When you say follower of death, there may be the misconception that there's some sort of a personified deity of death, and this person follows that personified deity and is therefore a worshiper of death. That's not what this is talking about at all. It is also not about people who are in some sort of a death cult for mass suicide or killing, homicide. It's not about that. It has nothing to do. To be a follower of death doesn't mean that, oh, that person is an assassin. This is absolutely not that. This is just about somebody who is rigid and inflexible. So why would that be a follower of death? Well, it is because the world is constantly changing. The principle of change is ever present. The very first book about the Tao, the Jing, is the book of changes. So change is at the very center of concepts associated with the Tao. So symbols like the yin and yang symbol itself and also the Bagua originated at the same time as the I Ching. And we're talking more than 4,500 years ago prior to that oral tradition. So likely 5,000 years ago or even a little before that. So because the world is constantly changing and there are people who go with the change and the people who refuse the change. Specifically, people with that rigidity, lack of flexibility, they are unwilling to accept change. They're unwilling to adapt to change. That's bad news because the world will not stop changing on their account. So such people end up being eliminated by change. That is to say, the world moves on without them. Now we see this in a couple of different ways. We can see from science, from our understanding of evolution, that living things that could adapt to changing environments had a much better chance of survival and then passing on those attributes to the next generation. That's overall a Darwinian evolutionary aspect or perspective on it. But closer to home, in our world, we see the world full of change. We see how things are changing with incredible speed. And we see, again, that some people can embrace change while some cannot. So these are the ones, the ones that cannot are the ones that will be eliminated by change, just as evolutionary process will move on, survival of the fittest, and it will do without the life forms, the organisms that were unable to adapt to changing conditions. That's the reason why such people with that rigidity, that lack of flexible outlook, that is why they are the followers of death. Now, when we talk about the follower of death, this is actually an expression that has appeared before in Daodejing chapter 50. But in that chapter, even though the characters are exactly the same, the context is very different. So I want to bring that chapter back at least a few lines to talk about, to showcase where that is. So you can see in the highlight that in line 3 of chapter 50, you've got the exact same characters there, the followers of death. and they're actually translated the same way too. But despite the same characters in the same translation, it's different. It's about people who take excessive risks, the thrill seekers, the people who are risking their lives unnecessarily. In that chapter, in 50, those are the followers of death. In this chapter, 76, the followers of death are the ones who are not willing to change because they are rigid, they are inflexible, they lack the pliancy of life. So it's different. Now, you can see the commonality between the two in that being unwilling to change and living a life of excessive risk specifically, these are both ways that lead to death. So there is a commonality in that regard. Let's continue on. Because of the complementary duality of yin and yang, we have to talk about followers of life after we talk about the followers of death. So let's start that process by going into line 8. Line 8 says, that which is soft and yielding. So 3 characters there. Let me highlight the middle character, 弱. And here's the opinion. 弱 is not well depicted by RUO, but then there's nothing else closer in English. So 弱 means weak, feeble in modern Mandarin. Now, in this ancient context, it's actually not about weakness. It's actually about this yielding pliancy, the ability to be flexible, to move around, to change, to adjust, to yield, to be pliant. So that's not necessarily a weakness. That's actually a sign of being alive, and that if you are able to adjust in order to survive a particular peril, that's not being weak, that's actually being strong. So putting the characters together, what are we talking about when it comes to a person? Well, someone who can embody the softness principle. And there's actually multiple ways to look at this. And this becomes clear when you follow, for instance, a Tao master in an authentic Tao tradition. They'll talk about the softness as it manifests in different ways in one's life. There are multiple ways in that manifestation. Let me run through them with you. So we talked about how the principle of softness is aligned with life. So examples you can see all around us, even just the blade of grass growing out of the ground, just the grass in your lawn, soft, supple, full of moisture. That's embodying the principle of softness. It's aligned with life. Look at the softness of a newborn infant, babies, toddlers. Okay, we can see softness principle being aligned with life. Easy to see. Number 2 is that the softness principle is about adaptability. And as I mentioned, the ability to make changes to accommodate a changing world, adjust yourself to a changing world, being flexible in that regard. So that's another manifestation. Yet another one is pointing to the yin and yang duality, which means within strength there's weakness, and within weakness there is strength. So remember the picture of green plants breaking through concrete? Well, it seems to be soft and supple, the plant, and yet it's powerful enough to break through the very hard concrete layer so that it can emerge into sunlight. So there's indescribable power there. It's the power of living things. And then number 4, the openness to admit mistakes and consider alternative opinions. That is to say, not fixated on one's own ideas and opinions, and being open to admit that, hey, nobody is perfect. I may have just made a mistake. So all of these are attributes of the follower of life. We can see that the follower of life is the opposite of follower of death. So the follower of death is someone who's eliminated by change. That's why we say that they follow death to their demise. The follower of life will be the opposite of that, not eliminated by change. Specifically, when you are the follower of life, you are someone who, before the change, you could see it coming. So even before the change comes, you can anticipate, you know that something is about to be different, and you prepare for that. You are mentally ready for that. And as the change is taking place, which nowadays is all the time, through changing times, able to make continuous adjustments. That's kind of what we all have to do now. Think about the tremendous changes that has taken place in our world, in every aspect of our world. It used to be that people read newspapers and periodicals, magazines all the time. And in recent years, that's actually beginning to decrease significantly. So there's less and less and less. People turn to alternative ways of getting their updates, their news, their information. Rather than newspapers and magazines, they're turning to the internet, news websites, and so on. So that's just one example out of many of the tremendous changes that are taking place. And the change hasn't stopped. We all still need to make continuous adjustments. That's the Tao. Even the Tao sages from centuries ago had no idea what the internet was or was going to become. They talked about universal principles that we find apply to our world, our lives, extremely well. Details may have changed, styles may have changed, but the principle, the universal eternal principles remain unchanged. So then, beyond the current changing times, there is also looking to the future. And within the current change that is taking place, someone who is a follower of life can figure out the new rules in order to master the new game. So what I'm saying here is that this is not merely someone who survives change, but someone who thrives in the new situation. Then, as I said, this is also the person who continues to look ahead, who continues to be curious about what's around the corner, what's beyond the horizon, what's coming next. Therefore, such people are lifelong learners. They're always curious. They're always willing to absorb new information. They want to continue to anticipate, to know what's coming, to be ready for that too. So as we study the Tao, I hope that this is what we all take on as our default mindsets, that we want to be followers of life. In this context, we want to always be ready for new things coming up and new technology that is occurring, that is being disseminated, that is being shared. We want to all be aware of the latest things that are happening. Okay, moving on. Continuing with the follower of life discussion, I want to emphasize that just like the follower of death, this is an expression that has also appeared previously in the same chapter, Daodejing 50, chapter 50, but with a different context. Just like the follower of death had a different context in Daodejing 50, same with the follower of life. So here's what it looks like. As you can see in line 2, you've got the same 3 characters, the same translation, the followers of life, but because the meaning is different, that's the reason why I want to highlight it. It's about people, in chapter 50, it's about people who are excessively cautious. So remember, the followers of death in chapter 50 is about the people who live lives of excessive risk, excessively risky. And this followers of life is the complementary opposite of that, the people who are excessively averse to risk, excessively cautious. That means followers of life in chapter 50, they live within the comfort zone. Now, it means a life of safety, and it can mean a long life as well, because they're not throwing their lives away, risking their lives, ending it prematurely, and therefore not, which is a negative aspect of it, that they are cutting off their life prematurely. But it's also negative when you are this way, when you are follower of life and you are in the comfort zone, you are not trying anything different, you are not seeing anything different or learning something new, so you miss out on life. So that is also seen as not positive. To make this clearer, I've constructed a table of comparison that we can go over now. And I think this will bring some clarity into the situation. So we've got followers of life, followers of death, and then we have the Tao. And then in the rows, we've got Daodejing 50 and also Daodejing 76, what we're studying today. So how do they compare? Starting with 50, followers of life, again, they are people who are excessively careful in living life. They value safety above all. Their lives can be long and uneventful, but they miss out on many things that life has to offer. Followers of life. In chapter 50, Lao Tzu says, among the population, among people in general, there's 3 in 10, or what we would today say 30%. 30% of the people play it safe. And then followers of death will be the other way, will be the complementary opposite. They are excessively careless in living life. They take many risks unnecessarily. This eventually catches up to them, leading them to death and cutting their life short. And that's why they're followers of death. So in chapter 50, Lao Tzu also says, among people in general, there's also 3 in 10. There's about 30% of the population who are followers of death. Too many risks. So what Lao Tzu says about these 2 different camps is that the Tao is not with either one of them. So remember, this is the context of 50. The real Tao cultivator, in this case, would not be follower of life or follower of death in that description. Rather, the Tao cultivator is the one who lives life with moderation. Remember, followers of life are excessively cautious. Emphasis on the word excessively. And followers of death are excessively reckless. Emphasis on the word excessively. Moderation is the avoidance of extremes of excess. So the Tao cultivator lives life with moderate amounts of safety and risk, depending on the situation. This enables the cultivator to enjoy life while being protected from dangers. In chapter 50, Lao Tzu talks about this kind of person and says, in a metaphoric way, that wild animals have no way to harm such a person. Weapons, soldiers have no way to cut into such a person. This is just to say, this is a metaphoric way to say that when this person goes through life, they are going through life with enjoyment, without danger, because in living life correctly in accordance with the Tao, they are in effect protected by the Tao. Now, in the chapter that we're studying, followers of life are the people who understand the virtue of pliant softness, the principle of the soft. Therefore, these are the people who can adjust to changing conditions. And the graphic that I have for that is grass. Because grass is alive, it's soft, it's supple, it's a new growth, so symbolic of life. And conversely, followers of death are the people who don't understand that, the virtue of softness. They face life with rigidity, with stiffness, with harshness. And the graphic for that is the opposite, is a complementary opposite of the green grass. It's a bunch of dead branches, as you can see. So those are the representations of soft versus hard. So in this case, unlike in chapter 50, in this particular expression of followers of life and death, Lao Tzu definitely says that the Tao is aligned with those who understand the virtue of being flexible. That is, followers of life are also the cultivators of the Tao. So again, the characters are the same, but the meaning is a little different. These are the kind of things that you learn when you study the commentary of the Daodejing. Commentary of the Daodejing has historically been available in every generation, shortly after the original Daodejing was available to the public. So we're talking about a history of Daodejing commentary that's almost as long as 2,500 years. And those commentary based on scholarship at the time, going back to the earliest days, make it very clear that even though the characters are the same, the meaning is different. So we just got done talking about the difference between followers of life, followers of death, the way that the same terms are used in two different chapters, meaning different descriptions about different groups of people. So it's important to understand what that difference is. Now, beyond that, let's get back into Daodejing, chapter 76, and talk about line 10. Line 10 says, therefore, an inflexible army will not win. So it's important for me to single out two characters in the middle to talk about what they mean. 兵强 are the two characters. So the first character, 兵, and then the second character, 强. The pinyin is a little tricky. You just got to remember that the Q is actually CH. So it sounds like 强. What do these characters mean? Well, the first character, 兵, means soldier. It means the military, the army. So the meaning is all related. And then 强, just like 坚强, here the meaning is the same. It means strong, powerful. So when you put these together, strong military, strong army, or the army that is strong or powerful, look at the translation. It says inflexible army. What is the difference? What is going on? Why is it not translated in a literal fashion as a strong army? Well, the meaning here in this context is not so much strength, but aggression. So think about the word strong, not in Mandarin, but in English. When we use the word strong, we have different ways of utilizing that word. Sometimes we mean a positive kind of strength. Other times, it's actually negative. For instance, we use headstrong to describe someone who's stubborn. Or we have the expression, coming on too strong. Am I coming on too strong? And the too strong would be a negative context as well. So here, apply back to Mandarin and then back to ancient Chinese. The idea is that an army, being large and powerful, tends to become overconfident and therefore careless. So what is usually a positive context in this ancient context or ancient utilization of the Daodejing, the meaning is related but not the same. The context turns from positive to negative. Although such an army may appear to be very powerful, unstoppable force, Laozi is telling us that it is actually headed for defeat. So let's look at the whole line together. Therefore, an inflexible army will not win. It's inflexible because Qiang, being powerful, being overconfident, therefore being stubborn and not willing to take changing conditions on the battlefield into consideration. So typically, one would expect that a strong military force is more likely to emerge victorious, but his history is full of examples of smaller armies defeating larger opponents. In Chinese history, during the time of the Three Kingdoms, the most famous battle was called the Battle of Red Cliffs. And these are the cliffs by a particular large river called the Red Cliffs. In that battle, which was the largest naval engagement at the time, a smaller force of 50,000 defeated a much larger force of roughly 220,000. So 220,000 is the estimate by historians later on. At the time, the commander leading the larger army boasted that it was a force of 800,000. Either way, to be defeated by a far smaller force of 50,000, that is significant. And it goes to prove what Laozi is saying, that the larger, more powerful army isn't necessarily going to win. Now, there's more. There's also one of the many victories from Alexander the Great, the Battle of Issus, is a historical instance where a smaller force of roughly 40,000 defeated a much larger force of 250,000. So this is one of the reasons why Alexander the Great was called the Great. He was a creative, innovative battlefield commander. He was able to adjust to changing conditions. Remember, that's the principle of softness, to be able to make changes on the fly, to be dynamic and not static. And he saw opportunities, he exploited those opportunities, it led him to victory. So overall, whether it's Battle of Red Cliffs or Battle of Issus, victory went to the adaptable army, not the bigger army. And this goes toward exactly what Laozi is talking about. Now, the same concept applies in all areas of life, not just these ancient battles. And I want to make that very specific. I want to call out the Tao and say that whatever this is that we're calling the Tao, it's whatever the universal principles are at play in any situation. That's what we're trying to explore. We may be talking about this using the trapping of ancient Chinese culture, but what we're talking about is common to all of humanity. The principle, whatever that principle is something that applies across all of time and space. Therefore, not just Chinese history, but world history. Thus, Alexander the Great. Not just ancient times, but modern times as well, like right now, like recent years. These principles that we're talking about, these concepts deriving from the Tao, they all apply. And not just the battlefield, but all competitive arenas. So oftentimes people in business will see the marketplace as a battlefield. That's what I mean by that. And when we talk about examples in recent years and examples from the business world, there's actually tons of examples where smaller companies defeated much larger opponents. They started out disrupting a marketplace with innovative, creative, adaptable, new technology that took advantage of the changing landscape of the world. And they were able to eventually defeat the much larger enemy, quote unquote enemy. One example has to do with Netflix and Blockbuster. So today, we know Blockbuster is nearly extinct. Well, Netflix is huge. Now, the fortune of Netflix fluctuates, but there's no question it's one of the leading companies in the world. It's really big. But back in 2000, and if you think about the year 2000, that is only a little more than 2 decades ago. Back in 2000, Blockbuster had a chance to buy Netflix, and the offer was to buy Netflix for $50 million. Blockbuster declined to buy Netflix. If Blockbuster had bought Netflix, its fortune may be very different today. Today, of course, Netflix is dominant in internet web-based streaming, and Blockbuster has gone nowhere. Now, it's not the only example. Another example that I wanted to share with you is about Google and Yahoo. So Google and Yahoo are both known for internet search. Back in 2000, and even a little before that, 1998, Yahoo was the biggest internet company of all. Back in those days, they passed up the chance to buy Google. They had an opportunity to buy Google for $1 million. They decided to pass. Now, this was not the only mistake that they made. They actually made that mistake a second time. So fast forward a few years, 2002, between 1998 and 2002, Google became much more valuable. So now it wasn't just worth millions, it was worth billions. So Yahoo wanted to, realizing its mistake, Yahoo wanted to buy Google for $3 billion. Google came back and said, well, we can sell for $5 billion. Yahoo refused the offer again, thus passing up the second chance to turn itself around. Today, 2023, Google is worth 1.2 trillion. And Yahoo, as we all know, has become very obscure. So think about the progression. Back in 1998, $1 million. In 2002, $3 billion. Today, $1.2 trillion. Wow. So that is what we're talking about here, where Google started out as a much smaller army, but it was adaptable, it was adjusting to changing, advancing technology, while Yahoo, the larger company, was static, was stagnant, not changing, was the embodying the hard principle, whereas Google was the one embodying the soft principle. So of course, eventual victory, overwhelming victory, went to Google. So let's continue on. We can see that these principles Lao Tzu talked about are applicable across a wide range of different topics. So let's take a look at line 11. A strong tree will be cut down. So in this case, the strong tree is also tough and unyielding. And let me just take a moment to point out that the second character in line 11 is also Qiang, just like the character that I pointed out before for the army. It means strong in modern Mandarin, but in this context, it just means tough and unyielding. Now, for a tree to be tough and unyielding is a positive thing if what you're interested in is to make use of the tree as timber for construction. The tough and unyielding tree is great for that, so it gets cut down. This is a metaphor about an inflexible person being cut down in life. Just like the tree that is tough and unyielding, someone who is tough and unyielding gets cut down as well. So strong tree represents stubbornness. And we have similar metaphors in the Tao tradition about the tree being uprooted by powerful wind. So let's take a look. Let me call that out specifically. Again, this is the yin and yang complementary duality. On the one hand, we have the soft principle. That just means, for instance, you've got palm trees that can survive the hurricane. Why? Because the palm trees are able to bend with the wind. They remain flexible, and therefore they can survive. If you apply that to life, what that says is that if you maintain that same flexibility in yourself, you can be undergoing the hurricane of misfortune in your life, but you will emerge from that process stronger than ever because you are able to bend with the wind. So that's one side of the complementary duality, the yin and yang. The other side is the unfortunate image of a tree that has been snapped by powerful wind. So this is the hard approach, refusing to yield when facing the winds of change. You are either uprooted or snapped. Now, these trees have grown to a considerable size. They have burrowed deeply into the earth. They have an extensive root system that grab onto the earth for dear life. And it doesn't matter. When you have powerful winds, they can break, just like that. So these are very telling examples of how the principles of the soft and hard are different, especially when applied to life. I think all of us can expect that as we go through life ourselves, we can be encountering hurricanes from time to time. So that means it's going to be a lot better for us to be like the palm trees than the tree over here that has been snapped by the strong winds. And there are additional examples that are usually talked about by Tao masters when they speak of the soft versus the hard. Probably the first thing that they will talk about is water being the softest thing in the world, and then something hard will be like rocks or stone. And when you pit the two against each other, you find that water, the softest thing in the world, can seep into, drill through, and wear away stones. And this is often the first example to illustrate how the soft can overcome the hard. And this gets repeated a lot in the Tao tradition. And then the other one is tongue representing the soft, teeth representing the heart. How does that work? Well, the tongue is soft, but you're always going to have your tongue. No matter how old you get, what age you reach, you're going to still have your tongue, your teeth, well, you may not. They fall out when you get old. You end up losing your teeth. You're going to need to get perhaps implants or other measures to continue being able to use your teeth. But the overall idea is that, well, the soft will go the distance. The soft will last. The soft will win out in the end. So life is more like a marathon. It's not a sprint. And the person who ends up getting all the way to the finish line is the soft. And this is the oldest example in the Tao tradition to show the soft eventually wins. This is often attributed to Lao Tzu. And I want to also point out that the same wisdom is pervasive throughout human cultures, regardless of cultural, ethnic origin. So in the Western world, we have the expression, you catch more flies with honey. That just means that you get better results with a soft approach, which is like a polite request, being nice. You get a better result with that than the hard approach. The hard approach is making demands. So often, and the complete expression is, you catch more flies with honey than vinegar. So honey represents the soft approach, and vinegar represents the hard approach. Okay, let's continue on. We just have a couple more lines. These are the concluding lines. They happen to be the most meaningful lines, and typically a Tao master will spend quite a bit of time to make sure that everyone gets all the nuance, all the layers of hidden meaning associated with these two lines. So line 12 says the big and forceful occupy a lowly position. So this is a little bit counterintuitive. The reason why I say that is because conventional wisdom usually will put the big and powerful on top. The big and powerful, especially in our culture, seems to be the one that we idolize, the one that we emphasize, and the one that we present as the ideal. So that is the conventional wisdom. The Tao perspective is different. Lao Tzu says reality can be quite the opposite. And we can see numerous examples of this insight in the world. That is, as an example, if you see like a big and powerful truck, well, it generates a lot of momentum, so it cannot stop on a dime. It needs a certain amount of distance to be able to slow down and come to a halt. Same thing with a huge cruise ship. You wouldn't expect to be able to turn a huge cruise ship very quickly. You have to turn very slowly over a vast distance. And even bigger and more powerful than that, if you think about an aircraft carrier, not only is it something that doesn't turn quickly, it presents a big target in a battlefield engagement. So there are definitely disadvantages in being big and powerful. When it's a company or an organization or corporation, if it's big and powerful, well, the disadvantage is that whatever changes are necessary, they happen slowly. They are like the giant tanker or cruise ship or aircraft carrier. They have to turn very, very slowly. And this is only if they become aware of the necessity to change. That cannot be taken for granted. Reason being, when you are big and powerful, you may not feel like you need to be flexible. You feel instead that you can steamroll over all opposition. So we again have common wisdom among humanity. So in the Western world, we have a saying, the bigger they are, the harder they fall. So big and forceful, big and powerful, not necessarily a good thing. In the Tao, lower position. Let's examine the complementary opposite of that. Line 13, while the soft and pliant occupy a higher place. So this is important. This is the opposite of the big and powerful, the big and forceful. Note that the opposite of that is being soft and pliant. The opposite is not small and weak. Usually, when we think about big and powerful, big and forceful, and take the complementary opposite, we would say small and weak. But Lao Tzu says, no, it's actually soft and pliant. And that's important. It's important because one can practice the principle of softness and flexibility at any size or strength. Sometimes being too big, too powerful, too strong will blind you to the necessity of the principle of softness. But if you weren't blinded by that, you can also practice being soft and being flexible at that larger size or at the greater strength. So how does that work? It begins with awareness. Now remember, the principle of softness is all about being able to adjust to changing conditions, to embrace change, to take advantage of change. So it begins with the awareness, the alert that there's approaching adversity. That is, there's something coming, it's going to shake things up. So we better be ready for that. Then you need agility. You need to move quickly in adjusting and adapting in anticipation for the approaching adversity. This becomes an advantage. It's a powerful advantage, and Lao Tzu describes it as occupying a higher place. So that is the last line of the Daodejing, chapter 76, but it's not the last thing we need to talk about. We need to focus on this concept of how the soft and pliant occupy a higher place. Now, first, I want to point out for everyone that this whole idea of being soft and pliant, especially the principle of softness, is one of the most important and most repeated concepts in the Daodejing. And I want to bring to you a sample of the recurrence of this concept elsewhere in different chapters of the Daodejing. I'm going to start with a chapter that we went through a long time ago, chapter 36. Here's how things looked in 36. In line 9 and line 10, you see the reference to that. Line 9 says this is called subtle clarity. Line 10 says the soft and weak overcomes the tough and strong. So the character Rou is the first character in line 10, translated as the soft. And then Daodejing 43, it begins on the concept of the softest. The softest things in the world override the hardest things in the world. That's just to kind of showcase and emphasize how important the concept is. And then again, in chapter 52 of the Daodejing, towards the end of it, we see a reference. Seeing details is called clarity. And I want to point to this line about clarity, line 14, to line 9 in 36. This is called subtle clarity. So in both cases, there is a connection made by Lao Tzu that if you are able to see things clearly, if you have mental and spiritual clarity, then you will be able to see the true strength of the soft principle. So in 52, in line 15, it says holding on to the soft is called strength. So what that says is real strength will have the appearance of the soft and gentle while harboring that strength, that very strength. And then, of course, in 76, we have the lines that we're studying in this chapter about softness. In a chapter coming up, actually coming up soon, in 78, we're going to see it again. And there, once again, it begins on that note about softness. Nothing in the world is softer or weaker than water, yet nothing is better at overcoming the hard and strong. So now you see the repeated emphasis on the soft from the Daodejing. It just means that this is something we need to especially pay attention to. And this is the reason why Tao masters spend a lot of time on that very last line of chapter 76. And I want to share with everyone that there are very few people in the world that I would acknowledge as being living sages. These are few and far in between. In fact, after decades of devoted study of the Tao, I can think of two individuals who are the real deal, the actual living sages among us. Sadly, they have both passed away, but not before leaving us with a lot of teachings and guidance. And I want to share that guidance with you. I was very fortunate in being able to meet with, spend time with these living sages in previous years. And this one of them, who passed away at the age of 99, was one of the few truly accomplished living sages. No matter what kind of title other Tao sages have, other Tao masters have, I would tell you that, in my opinion, they don't even come close to these living sages that have now passed away. So on this specific topic of occupying the higher place, according to the Tao, this particular senior Tao master provided specific guidelines that I would be very honored to share with everyone. About Tao cultivators, this Tao master talked about how, first of all, the demeanor of Tao cultivators is modest, friendly, helpful, and positive. And that's what it means to have that soft approach. And you can notice as well that the third character in this Tao master's description of people like that is the same character that we're noting today as the character for the principle of softness. Then the senior Tao master talked about how a lot of times in life we have discussions, arguments, even debates with other people, even though in Tao cultivation we want to avoid arguments and debates as much as we possibly can. The distinguishing characteristic of Tao cultivators is that oftentimes they know what they're talking about, so they have the facts on their side. But when the facts are on their side, they react and behave differently than most people. A lot of people with the facts on their side become very self-righteous. They want to bang the table. They want to press their advantage. They want to drive home their points. They get louder and more aggressive. Tao cultivators, when they have the facts on their side, become actually even more harmonious. They try to let the other party down easy. They try to make sure that there's a graceful exit for all parties involved. They become more harmonious, not less. They do not exhibit the least amount of being self-righteous. Extremely important. And number 3, this Tao master talked about how Tao cultivators with a soft approach to life, they know that gentle courtesy wins far more respect than abrasive rudeness. Now, it seems obvious when I say it like that, and yet in life, we have seen any number of people who feel like they have to command and demand respect by being loud, abrasive, rude, and aggressive. You probably can think of a few people right now who think that way. They want to say, well, I want to make sure everybody knows what's up. I want to make sure they know that I am in charge. And therefore, they behave in that particular way. Tao cultivators know that is not the path to respect. One cannot demand respect. One earns respect. And one can do so by being gentle and courteous. That's the soft approach. And they also know true strength is about honor and excellence, not aggression. So when you talk about someone being strong in the West, we think about like a guy with big muscles, imposing, physically intimidating. In the Tao context, we talk about someone with inner strength, someone with the strength that they can bring to any adversity, any setbacks, any misfortune in life, and emerge victorious. That's real strength. And then lastly, Tao cultivators know that a low profile is far more useful than a high profile. And indeed, this particular senior Tao master goes on to explain the aspects of taking on a low profile. And some of it is things that we can all use a reminder to remind ourselves to behave in that particular way. So assuming a low profile, what does that mean? Well, a low profile in one's attitude, it means that you always assume you have more to learn. Never assume that you know it all. That's taking a low profile in terms of one's attitude. You can easily think of the opposite attitude, and that is the assumption that I'm the one who knows. Everybody else is an idiot. Okay, that is not a low profile. And then the other aspect of it is to expect more from yourself and less from others. The high profile is the expectation that others must wait on you, that others must do your bidding. The low profile in one's attitude is to say, I will be the ones to take that on, and other people, well, I'm not going to have that same expectations on them. So those are the two most important points about having a low profile in one's attitude. And let's also take a look at conduct, how we act toward other people. Low profile means to not flaunt, showcase, or advertise anything about yourself. High profile is everybody look at me, grabbing the limelight, hogging the spotlight. Low profile is, I don't really need all that. If some people want to talk about what I have accomplished, they can talk about it. I don't need to talk about it myself. And then the other manifestation of low profile is that you focus on a life of service. You serve others before serving yourself. Whereas the opposite is that someone who is self-serving, someone who's focused on his own personal selfish interests. The low profile is the opposite. And lastly, low profile in your communication, what does that mean? To have a low profile in communicating means being soft-spoken. It is always preferable to being loud and rude. And I think we all see examples of that in our own lives. And lastly, human communication tends to be not perfect. There's going to be misunderstanding from time to time. Usually, when people are arrogant, and there's a misunderstanding, they will put that responsibility on the others. They will say, well, that's not what I meant. Well, they should figure out what exactly it is that I'm trying to explain to them, because I told them. Now, having low profile, the Tao of humility means that whenever there is misunderstanding, which is invariable, inevitably some misunderstanding is going to occur. The Tao cultivator assumes a low profile in communication by seeing that as an opportunity to improve the clarity of one's expression. If they didn't understand me, it just means that I did not express myself as clearly as I possibly could. Therefore, I am lacking in my skills of clear expression. I need to work on that. That's assuming the low profile, which ironically leads one to occupying the higher place, a higher place in life. So as you can see, I think the senior Tao master, a living sage, knew exactly what it was talking about. I have learned tremendously. One of the two senior sages has actually set the course for my life. And so the impact cannot be underestimated. And I only hope that the world will have another living sage like the two who have passed away soon. So now we are past the time that we should be spending together today. So I'm going to move to the summary. We have completed our discussion of all the lines in Daodejing chapter 76. Last time, we took the first half and we had the following summary, that to apply the teachings from Lao Tzu, number one, we wanted to observe the world and see the difference between the soft approach and the hard approach. And if we look at the world through the eyes of the Tao, we will definitely perceive how the soft approach wins in the end, while the hard approach falls flat and then falls apart, so that we can learn from those observations. Then, based on those observations, we want to develop the soft approach as a strategy for life. And I've got some suggestions here. We can start by being more attentive to loved ones. They are the ones that we need to pay attention to. Ironically, oftentimes they bear the brunt of anger, and they don't deserve that. So I want to remind everyone to be kinder, softer, more attentive in our personal relationships. And to the people that you come across every day, I want to suggest that there are many gestures of kindness that we can offer other people, even if it's just a positive greeting or just a warm smile, just a friendly gesture. That can mean a whole lot to the people you encounter every day. And then lastly, just to reiterate a point that we made today, you want to be flexible or soft in your approach to a particular goal. If you encounter an obstacle, you can switch and change it up and approach it a different way while keeping your eyes on that same goal. So these are the summaries of part one, the first half of our discussion. Now, from today's discussion, there's a couple of major points that I want to cover. Number one, observation again. And this is observing people through the eyes of the Tao, noting that evolution favors adaptability. Those that can adapt are those that can survive. So it is the same for us in our world. Those who cannot adapt to change are the ones who are going to suffer. We don't want to be among them. Those who embrace change are the ones who will prevail. That is what we need to do as well. Second point, occupy the higher position through softness. You have just seen the teaching from the senior Grand Master who talked about the low profile and the specific ways to occupy the higher position naturally. You want to keep in mind that aggression will never result in real victory. You want to treat other people with the same kindness that you would appreciate from them. And lastly, the low profile, so important. Understanding that assuming the low profile is what naturally moves you into the higher place. The Tao is full of this kind of principle where it talks about how the sage, when leading people, supports the people from a lower position, but the people will elevate the Tao person, the sage or the Tao cultivator, to the top. In a similar way, when we assume the low profile, that is what naturally will propel us to the higher place, the higher position. Our meeting has come to an end, but the journey continues on. Let us all travel safely so we can meet again. Until next time, may the Tao fill you with peace and happiness.